right, y'all. Welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I am the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and I've recorded more than 5,000 interviews going back to 2003, all of which are available at scotthorton.org. You can also sign up for the podcast feed. The full archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, on the line, I've got the great Kelley Vlahos, and she is the executive editor of the American Conservative magazine. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Scott.
Very happy to have you here. And I just love it when you talk bad about Michele Flournoy, because I think she deserves it real bad, and nobody else ever really does it. You're picking up the slack of 300 million Americans who should all be condemning this horrible woman. Michele Flournoy, Queen of the Blob, is the title of your recent piece at TAC. And for people who are just tuning in from, I don't know where they've been, what's the Blob, Kelley?
Well, I say the Blob is the greater foreign policy establishment, the swamp in Washington. So you picture the Pentagon and all of its tentacles in Congress and the White House, the lobbying architecture, even academia, the think tanks, basically the whole ecosystem that subsists from pro-war industry and ideology and the whole national security state. So it's an easy functioning word for a very awful place.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I guess it was Ben Rhodes in the Obama government that coined the phrase, I forget, in an interview with somebody or something. Yes. And one of the things that he talked about was, well, the Blob has a playbook, and it's the playbook. You might say it's Foreign Affairs Magazine, whichever exactly the playbook is, and, maybe foreignpolicy.com instead. But that the playbook always says do more everywhere at all times and never back down and never admit that the last guy was wrong either. Much less your own self. And, by all means, double down always. And as he complained about during the Obama years, and we certainly see this almost in the kind of ad absurdum sense in the Trump years, that any action they will cheer, and any intention to withdraw from anywhere ever or retrench in any way leads to hysterical cries of Munich and selling out our allies, and we're going to lose our confidence in our leadership position in the world, and China's going to take it over instead now, and every kind of thing. And they just will not tolerate dissent from the broader project of global hegemony, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And this is all represented in the elites of Washington, of the United States. So it's not just a matter, the they that you speak of are the people that are running everything. They're running the Pentagon, they're running Capitol Hill, they're running the White House, they're running all of our Ivy League institutions, our military academies, the think tanks, the most prosperous defense think tanks in town. And this has been happening and congealing over 7 decades since World War II. So it's a very entrenched elite, and it is very hard to penetrate. What we've been finding in the last few years, thanks in part to a number of different dynamics happening, particularly that the country is tired of war and are very disappointed that all of the mythologies that they had believed in about American might and primacy was all a facade. They saw that in what happened in Afghanistan and in Iraq, that the American people are no longer blindly following this elite narrative that you just described. And so there's been ways that the American Conservative, for example, and other institutions, scrappy, smaller institutions, have been trying to penetrate this blob. And I think we're starting to get through. As much as I am disappointed with the Trump administration not following through on some of the promises, surprise, surprise, that it made on the campaign end about ending wars and getting us out of the Middle East, I think that has also helped in terms of the allowing us to be in the conversation at a more national level instead of just sort of punching at the sidelines, punching up from the sidelines. So I just think that I feel a little better now that I guess an alternative message is getting through, but it's been very hard, as you know, and we'll talk more about Michele Flournoy and other elites who are so entrenched in the system, not only because they believe in this liberal internationalist order that's all about American primacy and American exceptionalism and using the military to resolve problems overseas, but they're also profiting from it. So their very livelihoods are connected to this narrative and making sure that we stay in this narrative forever.
Right. Well, and she really is a great poster child for that. So let's make her famous here. But first, the thing of it is that, and you hear this a lot from all kinds of people, at all different walks of life, but, especially kind of in business that, hey, these are the rules of the game. So if the lawyers say that this is the way that we can do it, then we can. And they don't know what's wrong. Like, essentially, if it's legal and it's part of the system, then it would seem strange to have an ethical objection to participating in it. So in other words, if you're the Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, and then you can go get a job running a lobbying shop and making tens of millions of dollars, helping connect contractors with the military where you previously worked and that kind of thing, as long as it's within the rules of the game, they don't even know it looks embarrassing. The term conflict of interest is old-fashioned, gone with the 20th century. Nobody's even heard of that anymore. It just seems okay. So she goes out and does these things that you're about to describe in public in such a way that is to her discredit to such a severe degree, but apparently she doesn't even really realize that. This is just how business is done. Just like Joseph Dunford was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and now he's sitting on the board of directors over there. Is it Raytheon? I forget which one. All these guys. That's just the rules of the game. So it's not wrong as far as they can tell, and they just keep right on. And you mentioned in here that there's this new report from the American Prospect where they did kind of this deep dive on Michele Flournoy's career since losing the Afghan war and leaving the government.
Right. And most people haven't heard of Michele Flournoy, and nor will they probably in any other avenue, because she's one of those, she's a classic example of, I call like Blob denizens who aren't really out for glamour or glory or making a huge splash in the media. She's actually one of these people who have toiled away pretty effectively inside the Blob, inside the Pentagon, and at least 2 administrations. So she went from, I said here in the article that she went from Beverly Hills High School to Harvard to Oxford, back to Harvard, and then right into the first Clinton administration, working in policy, defense policy, and then shifting over to the Obama administration. And in between, starting a think tank, the Center for New American Security, which was supposed to be sort of a shadow government for Hillary Clinton when she ran for president in 2008. She didn't win her primary. Obama did, and so they shifted over all of their efforts at CNAS, and she ended up serving in the Obama White House in the Pentagon as an undersecretary, a very high posting. And after Obama, and ended up, as you mentioned, like many others in the Blob, profiting off of all of that experience that she had for 20 years within Washington. So, she's serving on different boards of different companies. She's serving on the Defense Policy Board, which is a pseudo government. It's sort of a quasi-governmental advisory board, which also comes with money. And she started this advisory consulting business with 2 of Biden's former staffers, or Obama rather, and is making hand over fist, basically, like you said, connecting corporations with federal contracts. And so, she's been very successful, making more money than most Americans could even fathom in a year's salary, and would likely be a sort of front runner for a Biden appointment if he were to win in November. And the reason why I went after Michele, which I've written about her before, is I don't think she's a bad person, but we have to be clear here. She, along with many of these others, have been behind some of our most destructive, foreign policy and national security policies of the last 20 years. So when she was in the Clinton administration, we were bombing Kosovo. When she was in the Obama administration, she was supporting the surge and putting more troops in harm's way. She has been a proponent of these destructive approaches, and as a result has been able to help maintain the status quo. And it's people like her who never are held accountable for being at the spear point of these disasters, but yet are profiting. Whether there's a recession or pandemic, they always come out on top. And that bothers me, as it should bother any other thinking American.
Yeah, absolutely right. Hold on just 1 second. Be right back. So you're constantly buying things from Amazon.com. Well, that makes sense. They bring it right to your house. So what you do, though, is click through from the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org, and I'll get a little bit of a kickback from Amazon's end of the sale. Won't cost you a thing. Nice little way to help support the show. Again, that's right there in the margin at scotthorton.org. Hey, y'all, check it out. The Libertarian Institute, that's me and my friends, have published 3 great books this year. First is No Quarter, The Ravings of William Norman Grigg. He was the best one of us. Now he's gone, but this great collection is a truly fitting legacy for his fight for freedom. I know you'll love it. Then there's Coming to Palestine by the great Sheldon Richman. It's a collection of 40 important essays he's written over the years about the truth behind the Israel-Palestine conflict. You'll learn so much and highly value this definitive libertarian take on the dispossession of the Palestinians and the reality of their brutal occupation. And last but not least is the great Ron Paul, The Scott Horton Show Interviews, 2004 through 2019. Interview transcripts of all of my interviews of the good doctor over the years on all the wars, money, taxes, the police state, and more. So how do you like that? Pretty good, right? Find them all at libertarianinstitute.org/books. You need stickers for your band or your business? Well, Rick and the guys over at thebumpersticker.com have got you covered. Great work, great prices, sticky things with things printed on them. Whatever you need, thebumpersticker.com will get it done right for you. Thebumpersticker.com. Frankly, shame is all we've got, right? There is no accountability for any of these people. So all we can do is name them and shame them and say,
Right.
looks, and you talked about how she doesn't seek fame in the sense of going on CNN all the time. But she absolutely does seek fame. You can tell it's written all over her face how desperately she craves that respect inside the Blob and from the rest of the
true.
Washington consensus. And, I one time made fun of her on Twitter because it was so obvious that Barack Obama had offered her the job of Secretary of Defense for the waning years of his presidency, and she turned it down and decided that she would go and make money for a while and wait for Hillary Clinton, and she would be sure to be the Secretary of Defense to start fresh in the new Hillary Clinton years. And so I was on Twitter going, ha ha, Trump won and you lost, and now you're not the Secretary of Defense at all. You could have been the Secretary of Defense, and now you're not going to be because you got greedy. And one or two of, these blob people from wherever they came from came to, how dare you call her greedy? How dare you say that she's self-interested, this wonderful public servant? Look, argue with my narrative. She could have been the Secretary of Defense, but she turned it down because she wanted an even better Secretary of Defense job later from somebody else. So, as part of the fresh new team of women murderers who were sure to come in and help Al-Qaeda take over Syria and start a war with Russia and whatever they were planning to do in the Hillary Clinton regime.
Right.
In conspiracy with Anne Marie Slaughter and Samantha Power and the rest of these people straight out of some Charles Dickens novel. But So
That's so
yeah,
true.
no, yeah, and Flournoy, I don't know, that doesn't really mean anything, but it is important, as you said, it only got one space in your remark there. It really is worth dwelling for a moment on her role in the war in Afghanistan, where when
Yes.
Obama came in and you were among the very best in this society on criticizing this entire thing in the year 2009 and 10, as all of this is going down, where they pushed this fad of counterinsurgency led directly by this lady, Michele Flournoy, at the Center for a New American Security, which is just a playoff on the neocons Project for New American Century. Same thing, only for the Democrats. And they had, a few of these, goofballs like Chad. No, that's a different guy. John Nagel and what's his name? The Australian guy and a few of these others. And they pushed this whole thing that all we got to do. I'm sorry.
Kilcullen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All we got to do is triple the Afghan war and separate the people of Afghanistan from their husbands and brothers and sons and cousins and uncles, because they're not people. They're foreign invaders or something, not like us. And so we're just going to implement this coin, and we're going to win the population over. And they're going to turn on all the male members of their families and tribes and turn everything over to us and turn Afghanistan into a Western European, Westphalian democracy. And everything will be perfect. And everybody knew it was a lie at the time. And she was the one, as Secretary of Defense, Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, she was in charge of implementing it. She was essentially I don't know exactly how it works, but essentially in the chain of command with Gates and Petraeus and McChrystal and their failure. She pushed it, the whole thing, and her think tank pushed the whole thing, and then she got the job to implement it, and then she did, and she got a few 100,000 people killed and accomplished absolutely nothing and lost the war anyway.
That's right. And yeah, exactly. And I mean, I really appreciate your kind words to me, but I mean, you wrote a whole book on this, one of the most comprehensive books that I've ever read on the whole run up to the war and the disaster that Afghanistan was and is. But I know why you are heated about it, because I am too, because the entire city had been wrapped around the finger of these Coinonista types, and the fact that they were never held accountable. I mean, you remember when McChrystal was leading the charge in Helmand province with the idea that they would deliver government in a box. It was, the funny thing is the Democrats looked at what happened in Iraq and misinterpreted everything that happened with the surge and David Petraeus. And, the neocons on the other side said, wow, that really worked. We can get it to work for us in Afghanistan. But then they ladled on all this BS democratic liberal crap like government in a box and even screwed it up further. So, David Petraeus paying off, the Sons of Iraq or whatever they were called, the Sunnis. It actually worked, but like temporarily, because they bought off these guys and then took all their facial recognition and their eyeballs and everything and sold it to the Shias. But pass it over. But that's another story. But in Afghanistan, they never even got it working for 2 seconds. The thing was a disaster. And you were right. She was at the spear point of this and was all cooked up in her think tank, which was the place to be in Washington in 2010. I went to their conferences. I've written about it many times. I mean, to go into one of these annual conferences, you felt like you were surrounded by you were in the blob. There were military people everywhere in their military garb. There were military people greeting you when you walked in. The rest of the people were in dark suits. All these contractors, lobbyists, think tankers, courtiers, hangers-on. I mean, and it was hundreds of people.
That's where I quote you in the book, talking about all the people showing up to see and be seen,
like
and
elite.
Yeah.
It was sad, because it's like, we, American Conservative, we have an annual foreign policy conference every year. And I say it's successful, it's interesting, but to even get fraction of the people that would show up at these things. They were pulling in at least 1,200 people, I think,
Right.
at one point. You know, it was
Because it's all business. I mean, you
it's all
guys, you
business,
hold your
all
thing, and it's about
transactional.
morality and principle and the national interest of this country you love. They don't know anything about that.
No, it's all transactional. Because I mean, it was really weird, Scott. There was one point where like people were coming. I got approached, and this is just a side story, but just to tell you like the networking that was going on here. I got approached by an FBI agent when I was leaving the conference, I remember, because of a Russian that I had interviewed about a story who was also at the conference, and they saw me talking to him, and they knew where I was from, and they followed me out to try to get me hooked up so I could spy on the Russian who they say was a spy. Now, has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about right now. But the fact is, there were hundreds of people, and a lot of people were just sort of drawn like moths to the flame to these events because that's where everything was happening.
Crazy.
It was very odd. And she was at the top, like on the top of the cake.
Well,
the
I'm
wedding
glad you
cake.
didn't go along with that because
It
one,
was
it's
just
wrong
so
to be a rat,
weird.
but two, they could have just as easy been setting you up.
Totally,
You know?
because I was writing for antiwar.com at the time, and as you know, they were on the FBI's radar for no damn reason.
Yep.
And other than that, they were writing stuff that we talk about all the time on this show. But yeah, it was just a weird time in Washington. And if you were writing critically about the war or coin or any of that stuff, you were really on the fringe.
Yeah.
And the fact is, what we know now, looking at the Afghanistan papers, you know, we know that all these people were not only not serving the best interests of the country, they were lying. And
Yeah,
she
and they
was
knew it,
lying.
and they admitted it.
And
Yep.
yeah, and they admit it, you know, off the record. And we know it, but yet she is still very successfully working for all these corporations, including like, you know, Google affiliates are involved in, unmanned weapon systems. I mean, the most dastardly stuff that you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I guess in her mind and her friend's mind and all her supporters is, you know, like they're just doing the government's, you know, work. They're civil servants who are, you know, aiding, you know, they're just doing, facilitating, like you said, things that are well within the law. And if your belief system is all about, you know, national defense and perpetuating this American primacy and making sure our military is strong and worthy, then why not help these defense contractors build more weapons and more ships and whatever?
I wonder how big her
AI,
mansion and estate are. Like, does she have horses and stuff like that at this point, you know?
Who knows? But if you live around here, you know, the sad thing, and it's just like in places in California or New York City, it's like, yeah, you have a huge salary, but it doesn't go as long or as far, you know, in terms of real estate. And so I'm sure she lives in a very nice house and lives very comfortably. But, you know, it's funny because I had seen her in a debate recently on the whole idea of realism and restraint. And she was actually on one side with Bill Kristol and with Will Ruger. And forgive me because I don't remember who the other gentleman was.
You know,
on the
I didn't
restraint
watch
side.
that. I saw that you guys had, I guess, blogged that at TAC or something, but
Yeah.
I didn't watch it. A friend sent it to me, but I was so mad because I was supposed to debate Crystal, and
I
here some other
know,
guy
I'm
gets to
so
debate him,
upset.
so I was like, wah, and didn't watch.
Well, you know, it wasn't, I mean, it was funny because the guys on, you know, our side were very capable. And I
But they're
felt like
gentleman types. They're not like me. They're
they're
like
gentleman
nice,
types.
professional, academic sorts.
Everybody was being polite, and Bill Kristol and Michele Flournoy, they just came off as very milquetoast and weak. And I really just got the sense that they just don't know how to debate us because I'd like to believe in their heart they know that, you know, this whole argument that we have to maintain this American exceptionalism overseas, maintain all of these, you know, partnerships and strategic allies and keep our troops overseas and our missiles overseas and keep involved and remain involved in these overseas operations and interventions is somehow for the better good of the country and our national security. And it sounds so thin when they say it, because most people have woken to the the reality that we couldn't even win the Iraq War or the Afghan War with all of this superior might against disparate, quote unquote, ragtag groups of terrorists after 20 years nearly. And so I think most Americans are like, come on, guys. We saw Vietnam, we see Iraq, we see what's going on in Afghanistan today. We're not buying it anymore.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is just, even if you don't know anything about it, all you have to know is what year it is. You go, wait a minute, how can it take 20 years to kill 400 guys? Okay, let's pretend that it was 4,000 or 40,000. How can it take 20 years to kill 40,000 guys?
Right.
And that's when you know you're lying and inflating their numbers from 400 men to 40,000. But just even then, geez, you could kill 40,000 guys in a few weeks if you sent the army to do it, right? We must be killing the wrong people. Kelley, something's wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
And listen, before we get back onto the money making here and her advisory firm here, I love this, West Exec Advisors. I wanted to ask you if, before we get too far from Afghanistan, if you've seen the new movie, The Outpost.
No, I haven't. I'm probably not putting it on like my list of immediate movies which to watch, because I'm afraid of the Hollywoodization of the war.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. But you know,
I heard it was good, but I don't know. Have you seen it?
I did. I got it off the Pirate Bay the other day, and you know, so it's based on a Jake Tapper book. And so
Right.
Tapper, of course, has that professional news anchor's overly narrow focus where he refuses to ask any of the big questions about what we're doing there or anything like that. But at the same time, though, it's just inescapable when they show, you know, the helicopter view of this mountain range. Like, oh, there's 40,000 mountains. And our guys occupy this one base in the valley between these four mountains. And they're supposed to be accomplishing what? I mean, they are absolutely as far as you could get from anywhere without being on your way back again. And they're supposed to be winning over this ancient, you know, tribal culture. The guy, and you hear this over and over again from real people from the war as well as in the media, is just true. That, you know, these old men would say, what are you Russians still doing here? Why won't you leave us alone? And they're like, we're not the Russians, you know? Can't you tell from the accent? We're from America. They're like, what's America? They've never even heard of the New World. And we're sitting there warring against them in order to protect America from some Egyptian radical hijackers or some kind of thing like that or something. What? And then, you know, as a war movie, it's just, you know, it's an okay war movie. And they do a good job of making you care about these guys before you see them get killed.
Right.
And you can't help, for me, I mean, obviously I'm twisted this way no matter what, but trying to put myself in the shoes of the average guy watching it, I think it kind of was sort of inescapably, I don't know about Tapper, but it was part of the mode. It had to have been part of the way the story was being told by the director too, was that what in the hell are these guys dying for out there? Why are they there? And then as soon as they're done dying, the survivors leave. Well, why didn't they leave 6 weeks ago? Well, what the hell?
No.
You know what I mean? The whole thing is stupid. Anyway, I was kind of hoping that other people sort of reacted to it or would see that the way that I assume that they must. If they ask the question at all, if it comes up at all, it just seems like a fool's errand, you know, to coin a phrase. Like, it just seems like the dumbest thing. Don't you resent, when you watch the movie, don't you resent the officers for putting them there? Don't you think that some idiot who doesn't know what he's doing was making these decisions, whether it's McChrystal or somebody else, McKiernan before him? Yes. I mean, the answer has to be yes. What were they even doing there? It's crazy, you know?
You know, we had a pretty good review by Jim Pinkerton on our site on American Conservative last week. And, you know, if you had just taken the word
Oh, I missed that.
Afghanistan.
I missed that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, he delves into other issues, but he starts out and he had the same reaction as you had, um, clearly. But if you take the word Afghanistan out of his writing and you read and you say, wow, this sounds a lot like Vietnam, where these poor grunts on the ground were the victim of bad policy up the chain. And at a certain point, they're fighting for their lives, they're fighting for their brothers. They're not fighting for some bigger cause or against communism or against Al Qaeda. They're fighting to save their brethren right there in the ground. And not having seen the movie like you had, I really believe that's probably the message that carries through, but it's so
right. Yeah, that's the real danger, right? That they launder the war through the valor of the young men. That like, oh man, this guy risked his life to save somebody else, and what a great thing to do, which is true, but it's just not asking the right question,
Well, it's not asking the right question, but when you look at Vietnam movies of the past, or you talk with Vietnam veterans and their stories, that's the same story 40 years later, 50 years later. And that's depressing, because if it all comes down to the survival of the guys that you put down there, and they just want to get home, you're kind of losing the message that they were over there to do anything bigger than themselves. And then you think, okay, well, maybe this whole mission of doing something bigger than themselves, whether it's going after Al Qaeda, fighting them over there so they don't come over here, or in the case of Vietnam, was fighting the North so they'd stop communism, the domino effect. Maybe that was all bullshit, And it's like after 40, 50 years, we didn't learn our lesson, that they're still putting these guys in harm's way and stupid, crap like, the outpost in the bottom of the valley instead of on top of the mountain so that they could do counterinsurgency. These are all things they should have learned 40, 50 years before. And it's
just like Dien Bien Phu. It's like even before our loss in Vietnam, this is how the French lost in Vietnam, was they put all their guys down in the bottom of a valley surrounded by hillsides where the enemy could just rain shells down on them. And then they got to Afghanistan. They were like, oh, this looks like a great place to redo a thing like that.
Well, what's so ironic is that you have David Petraeus was part of this wing of a certain warriors of a certain age. I forgot what Andrew Bacevich called them. They were the Crusaders or whatever, who had written about and were big proponents of this theory that Vietnam could have been won if they did better counterinsurgency. So they get their war in Iraq, they get their war in Afghanistan, and they start applying all these lessons that they supposedly learned from Vietnam, and then screw it up all over again because they're just because they don't work. And then there are people like Gian Gentile, who I write about all the time, was one of these few military guys who are out there at the time going, guys, this doesn't work. We don't care what you have to say, Petraeus, in your dissertation about Vietnam. Doesn't work.
Right. I mean, the whole thing is so stupid. Imagine a foreign occupying army comes to Texas, and then they say to the women and children of Texas, we demand that you choose us over your husbands and brothers and uncles and sons who are fighting us, because they're the ones who are causing the disruption. We're just here trying to provide security. Now, tell me that anyone would buy that and go along with that at all, other than the very few people in the mayor's office that they took over and, essentially, co-opt, something like that. But everybody else would shoot at them. That's it. They'd be shot at until they left.
Right. I mean, it's ridiculous. And you remember all these attempts to establish these, local police units. And I forgot what they were called. But, they established these police, forces, small forces at the village level.
Right.
And we would go in there and we'd pick a side in a village that we had no idea what the dynamics were, what the local politics were. And we'd end up choosing, of course, the wrong side. We'd choose the warlords, the gangsters, the corrupt people, and give them guns and give them authority. And then they go rampaging, terrorizing the local people, raping boys, raping girls, getting away with it. And then they turn around and they go, we wish the Taliban was back.
Right.
Get out of here.
Hey, man, you guys are going to love No Dev, No Ops, No IT by Hussein Badakhshani. It's a fun and interesting read all about how to run your high-tech company like a good libertarian should. Forget all the junk. Read No Dev, No Ops, No IT by Hussein Badakhshani. Find it in the margin at scotthorton.org. Hey, y'all, here's the thing. Donate $100 to the Scott Horton Show, and you can get a QR code commodity disc as my gift to you. It's a 1-ounce silver disc with a QR code on the back. You take a picture of it with your phone, and it gives you the instant spot price and lets you know what that ounce of silver is worth on the market in Federal Reserve notes in real time. It's the future of currency in the past, too. CommodityDiscs.com, or just go to scotthorton.org/donate. Hey guys, Scott Horton here for ExpandDesigns.com. Harley Abbott and his crew do an outstanding job designing, building, and maintaining my sites, and they'll do great work for you. You need a new website? Go to ExpandDesigns.com/Scott and save $500. And now back to Michele Flournoy and her giant mansion that she knows is built on these people's blood. Right? These innocent little children being raped by the warlords that she was installing in power. That's on her, and she knows it all day, every day as she walks around. You know, she lounges by her pool, that this is all built on blood. And all of her best friends know it too. And yet, what wave of feminism is it where, let's take over the Pentagon, girl power, and it's all just about, I guess it's this centrist sort of liberalism that sees this as, the epitome of equality and achievement. That like, man, this lady, she's killed almost as many people as Douglas Feith, who preceded her as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Policy. So good for her. We got to get her to coach our softball team. We like her so much. She lost the war, but she killed a lot of people during it though still, so that's good.
Yeah, she lost the war, but she's really popular in the E-ring of the Pentagon. I mean, it's like high school.
And look, if Biden wins, which he very well might, she's going to be the new Secretary of Defense. That's what they say now. She doesn't get to work with Hillary, but she's first in line under the Democrats. They've said over and over again.
It'll be very, it'll be very interesting because if Biden does win, where does that put all of our efforts, over the last 4 years to try to sort of gain some inroads on beating the Blob, which, I have to say, I mean, these people are really fighting back. We have a piece on today on the American Conservative by Daniel Larison about, he takes apart this foreign affairs article by Michael Mazar, who basically says restraint doesn't work. It's a farce. People are, pie in the sky. There's not really a blob. There's no homogeneous foreign policy establishment. And Daniel Larison, goes blow for blow for blow. But the point is, we're starting to see these articles in Foreign Policy Magazine, in Foreign Affairs, in War on the Rocks, all of these blobby websites and magazines by academics, people who have worked in these administrations. You can tell we're actually hitting a nerve because they keep fighting back. They keep pushing back and saying, we're not a blob. Right. We're actually doing the Lord's work.
Right. It's the Quincy Institute, too. Got to give credit to Trita and Andy and Eli and the rest of the guys over there that this is a big part of what they're reacting to as well.
Exactly.
And that Andrew Bacevich, he's formidable, man. Can you imagine having to go up against him? Yeah. I love interviewing the guy and reading him. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's great. But I can't imagine trying to be one of these, blob people and having to go up against him in some kind of public forum. He'd smash them like the Incredible Hulk.
He does smash them like Incredible Hulk. He's my hero.
Yeah, I mean, and he's just absolutely got his act together on all the facts too. He's one of those guys, like Scott Ritter or whoever, who just has all the details at his fingertips.
Because he's been there and he's done that.
Yep.
I mean, he's a Vietnam veteran and he's an academic, so he has all the chops.
Yeah.
Of being
He is a legitimate academic historian, professor at Boston University, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and now he's a president of the Quincy Institute. And so he's formidable in the way where they can't ignore him. And when he calls these other academics out or these other blobsters out, they get all flustered because unfortunately, when I've been calling them out for how many years, they don't care because I'm just sort of like a little fly. But like somebody who, who actually has standing within the same community as they do and is telling them they're full of it, that Petraeus was full of it, their coin was full of it, now they're still full of it. They get upset because they're like, well, you know.
Well, and, I named the three main people there, and there are a handful of others there, and some of them are, also other, important academics and that kind of thing. But mostly, I think you could say they're all relatively marginal. The great Eli Clifton, who I absolutely love. I mean, he's in his history is writing for IPS and for Jim Loeb's blog, and he did some stuff for the American Prospect or for the Center for American Policy, I guess, before they fired him for being too good on Bloomberg's violations of people's rights when he was paying them a bunch of money. But anyway, not to say anything bad about him, just that he never got the credit that he deserved all this time.
Right, and I hope that's
him and Trita
change.
Parsi too. NIAC is important, but it's you want to take all of the think tanks in D.C. It's one of the most marginal ones, and now he's left them and joined this Quincy thing, and these people together, they have really increased their own stature and their own credibility in a way that I think they've succeeded in kind of forcing their way in, which is what they were trying to do.
Yeah. And if you look at their website, they have a ton of academics listed there as visiting fellows, senior fellows, and these people they're all in your top universities, and I think that's what's getting, aside from the great leadership of the people you just mentioned, the fact that you have a growing number of academics who are saying that we need a change, that the liberal, world order post World War II is not working. And in the past, you'd have think tanks where it would be a lot of people. You'd have some academics, but they would be very mealy-mouthed and really weren't taking a point of view. Here we have people who are lining up, and they're just and they're making waves. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right. I think that they have really gotten under the skin of this ecosystem, the military-industrial complex ecosystem, and I love to watch it. And I know the Koch people, the Charles Koch Institute, they're putting a lot of money into these national security and foreign policy programs at the university level.
Right.
Which the neocons were really good about that all the way up through 9/11 and beyond. And so you look at these grand strategy programs at Columbia and Yale or wherever, and they were all led by neocons. Mm-hmm. And now you're getting this money that Koch's like, okay, we're going to play that game. We got money too. And they're starting to feed these programs, and you're starting to see some seeds blossoming, which now they're having big conferences about restraint and changing things and reform. And I'm like, wow. I mean, as much as it sounds sort of like very, establishment, it's like sometimes you got to fight on their turf.
Yeah. Well, and also it's a matter of, again, with the calendar here, that they lost all these wars. I mean, the reason that the liberal international order is in such jeopardy is because of Afghanistan and Iraq, and Libya and Syria and Yemen and the absolute chaos. And, that has been unleashed from all of these wars. So it's not like they have anything to blame but themselves. It's not like a series of hurricanes came and destroyed most of America's economy or any kind of thing like this. They blew their whole wad in the sands of Iraq because they knew that they were so smart and knew what to do, and they didn't. And as we reported it back then, That was the high tide of the American empire, was right there in the spring of 2003, and it's been downhill ever since then. It's because of the decisions that they've made. And the worse things get, the more they lash out and the more they blame everybody else.
That's right.
They have only themselves to blame for it all.
Yep.
Well, and now on as far as the restraint thing goes, I think there really is a danger that some intervention gets a stamp of approval under restraint where, hey, at least it's better than the worst thing of all. But that's not really the measure. So I think, for those of us, well, I think at the American Conservative and at antiwar.com especially, our position still has to be hardcore and strict non-interventionism and total opposition to interventionism. And then, in the whole dialectic kind of scheme of things, let Andy and Trita split the difference and call it restraint and offshore balancing and whatever. But we're the ones who are right. They're the ones who should have to justify, the burden of proof is on them to even have a global navy, to even have American bases in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, anywhere. The burden of proof is on them that we should continue to do any of the things that they call upholding leadership and the world order and whatever, all this crap. They've ruined everything up until this point and completely bankrupted the country. I mean, as Ron Paul always says, bottom line is we don't have the money. How are you going to take over the world when you got to borrow the money from China to hem them in with? This whole thing is nuts. And so that's kind of what I worry about, is that that maybe they won't take the opportunity to really, that they do have, to really just turn the tables on the rest of the establishment, that they are really, should be feeling very much on the defensive, that the American people have no confidence in them whatsoever. The whole blob we would like to see, frozen and then smashed. And I worry that if they go, come on, guys, how about a little restraint some more, that they're actually kind of giving away the store to the guys who already lost it to us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. But a lot of, much of them, and I totally get what you're saying. And I realize that our whole, coalition, if you will, is a coalition. So you're going to have people who are less non-interventionist than others who are more sort of still have one foot in the sort of old order, and then everybody in between. But I think one of the messages that I've seen and that I've heard, and I think is very salient here, is that, and I agree with you, the burden should be on the other side to prove that all of these existing, allies and partnerships and, security agreements are still working. And if not, let's make a change. And I feel like when I've heard debates or I've heard the other side talk about this, they very condescendingly say, well, we're not going to leave our allies hanging in Europe because there's the threat from Russia. We're not going to leave our allies hanging in the South China Sea because of China or North Korea. And that's the end of the argument. And I think what Trita and the others have been doing very effectively have been pushing back and say, no, let's take every agreement separately. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the ramifications of bringing tens of thousands of troops home. Let's talk about the ramifications of not only not expanding NATO, but actually dissolving it, and let's talk about that in a serious way without you guys making us feel as though we're idiots or condescendingly saying that, obviously the whole world would go in a hell in a handbasket if we did that. End of story. And I think that's where I think the American people are prime right now for this conversation, because, we're hurting financially here. We see that things aren't working. We don't feel any safer. And when you tell people, yeah, we got, how many, 28,000 troops, in on the Korean Peninsula here, we have tens of thousands there. Oh, we're shifting some over to Poland now. Why? And I think we can't have an adult conversation about that. And the other side for years has just gotten by
Yeah.
with this standard boilerplate. We can't let our allies down.
Right.
And people are looking around going, hey, I kind of think that's bullshit.
Yeah, and really, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is they need to be just laughed down, right? They need, because the thing is, if they get away with the premise that, well, everybody knows what a giant threat Russia is in the first place, then you want to do nothing about that isn't a very good argument. It's got to be, don't give me that crap. You know what?
Show me. Yeah.
Our government complains constantly under Bush, probably under Clinton too, but certainly under Bush, under Obama, and under Trump. Germany doesn't spend enough on their military. Well, why is that? It's because they don't want to fight Russia again. And it's because they don't feel a threat from Russia, obviously, or they'd be spending the money to build up their forces. And that's it. So if the Germans are scientifically proven to not feel a threat from Russia, then that is meaningful. I insist. And let them defend themselves if it comes down to that. But we don't have anything like the conflict between Nazism and communism going on in Eastern Europe right now. This whole thing about, Putin wants to be a czar and reconquer Eastern Europe and all of this stuff, march into Poland or whatever, is garbage. Nobody really believes that. Even the hawks don't really believe that. They're pretending to believe that. They're the aggressors there. And again, it all comes back to West exec advisors helping hook up the business of the military-industrial complex, the biggest racket in the world.
Right. I mean, is it profitable to say, well, maybe we should take all those troops home. Maybe we should bring those missiles back. Maybe we don't need the ships in that part of the world. That's not profitable. So you're going to see tens of thousands of jobs lost on our end. And I'm not saying that in a way where, oh my God, we have to keep it going because of tens of thousands of jobs. What I'm saying is you're seeing a lot of livelihoods at risk. You're seeing a lot of promotions at risk. You're seeing people's, bonuses and salaries, And so why would you be arguing otherwise? I mean, the status quo has benefited this particular elite class for 70 years, and they're not going to go easily. They're just not. And so I agree with you. It's shame is a great way. If we can't do more at this moment, we can't elect a president that would actually get us out of these wars or populate these administrations with people who are our side of things from our point of view, then the best thing that we can do is be on these shows and write the stories and books that we're doing and keep hammering away and hope that it'll just pop the bubble at some point.
Right.
I know we've been working on it for a while, but I see with the opposition being so peevish lately, I think that we're having some effect.
Yeah.
I'm hoping.
Well, and hey, they screwed up everything. I mean, what are they going to do? Argue that, no, they really were right and it worked great? What was it that they did that worked great? What did they accomplish other than getting a couple of million people killed and causing a massive refugee crisis in Europe and, all of this? I mean, in fact, you talk about the liberal world order. The EU is coming apart at the seams in direct reaction to the consequence of the wars. And that was their greatest, highest priority project of the entire Western establishment from the end of World War II, was uniting Europe and in permanent alliance with the United States. And the whole thing's falling apart, and they're the ones who broke it.
Right.
And so what are they going to do? Sit here and say that, well, I don't know. I need to read Larison's article and the one he's writing about. But obviously, all they could do is just deny. All they could do is just, lie by omission if they want to pretend that any of these things worked. Hey, you know what? The supermajority has a democratic government in Iraq now. Now, there might be some more things that you need to know about Iraq, but let's just leave it at that, Kelley. How about that?
Yeah.
They have a parliament.
I'll make a gratuitous plug for our new podcast, The Empire Has No Clothes, because we do a weekly show, me, Daniel Larison, and Matt Purple, and we were just talking about this. And in that vein, Robert Kagan, the infamous academic, neoconservative, centrist, Blobian, has written about this recently in his new book, Back to the Jungle or Return to the Jungle, in which he basically says that the world order of American exceptionalism is strong despite some of these mistakes along the way. And these mistakes along the way are, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. So
Yeah,
they
little old things
literally,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, they literally view all of these foreign policy disasters as like bumps in the road, but feel that the overall worldview or approach to foreign policy is sound.
Right.
I mean, this is how they get around what you just said.
Yeah,
About
well,
all
they
their
do
stuff.
say with a straight face, listen, these international institutions have kept the peace for 70 years.
Right. It could have been so much worse.
And what they mean by that is Germany and America and Russia haven't gotten into another world war. But what they don't mean by that is that all the Koreans, Vietnamese, Laotians, Cambodians, Indonesians, Congolese, Iraqis, Afghans, that all of those who would have been alive are now because, yeah, they couldn't possibly make that case, could they? But kept the peace, whatever. They mean among, sorry, I don't want to sound all social justice in the middle of the leftist revolution here, but they mean the white nations haven't fought. You can slaughter any number of Asians, and that's different.
Right. Exactly. And we haven't had any major terrorist attacks here since 9/11. And so that's also touted as a success, of their interventionism abroad. Right. And it's part of the hubris of the last 70 years.
You just have to ignore quite a few actual successful terrorist attacks in the country that have taken place since then,
Yeah.
But they'll still say that. Of course, Jeb Bush in the debate said, my brother kept us safe. Remember the rubble? And Donald Trump was like, what? Yeah, I do remember the rubble. How's that back up your first claim there? What are you talking about? Oh, no, everybody knows he gets a free pass on the first 8 months in office. I mean, after that.
Yeah.
And then the fact that all the terrorist attacks there were probably 10 that happened during Obama times. Fort Hood and San Bernardino, and there was one, failed but real attack in New Jersey. The sidewalk attacks, the Times Square attack was another, fail. The Christmas Day attempted bombing of the plane over Detroit. So I guess many of those were failed, but they were legit, not FBI setups, but like real attacks by the enemy, in those cases. So. But you're right. They will pretend that those things didn't happen.
Right. Exactly.
The Omar Mateen massacre at the Pulse nightclub. They pretend that's because he was a repressed homosexual who was acting out his Islamic repression on these poor young men. When in fact that was a total lie. None of it was true. None of it at all. It was 100% about foreign policy and 0% about homosexuality. And they knew that, and they were lying the whole time in order to because it was a horrible massacre. And think about how successful they were at making gay people, like the gay community and political groups and organized groups and stuff, feel like, oh my God, these Islamic terrorists are coming for us because we're gay. And so maybe we need to rally behind the war on terrorism kind of thing, which is something that they're, mostly not, biased towards supporting. And then meanwhile, nope, it turns out that the Pulse nightclub was just the first Google result for nightclub after he was discouraged from attacking Disney World because they had too much security.
Jeez.
So he Googled nightclub, and the first one that came up was Pulse. And then he wrote on Facebook and told the 911 operator over and over again, this is 100% blowback from foreign policy. Nothing to do with the gayness of the victims whatsoever at all. What a great lie. You got to give them credit for getting away with stuff like that. It's just the same way as they got away with accusing Russia paying for American scalps in Afghanistan. And a couple weeks later, they back off and go, oh, yeah, we were just bluffing about that. But they get away with that stuff. They get away with telling whatever lie they want. I kind of admire them for it in a sick way. That just to have that much influence where it makes no difference whether what you say is true or not. You can just get the whole society to go along with whatever it is.
Right.
You know?
Because the mainstream media and the corporate media is foursquare behind it. So they'll continue perpetuating that story about the bounties, whether it's the reporting was solid or not, whether it's already been proven a lie or not.
That's right. The FBI says.
You see it. Yeah.
That's all they need.
You see it all over Twitter. I mean, people are still talking about it as though it's a solid fact.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And they're still doing follow-ups based on it, too. There's a big follow-up in the New York Times. I was complaining about on the blog at antiwar.com, where they have this one big paragraph that says, well, you know, if it's confirmed that it's true, then this would be big. Like some editor insisted that they have to put that in there, this big disclaimer that we have no reason to believe that this is true. Anyway, go ahead with the story. You know, huh? It's right there in the New York Times, the newspaper of record. You know?
Right, because most people will skim over that part.
Yep.
But they've covered their butts
in
the meantime.
Yeah, which is, I don't even know why they bother, right? It's like, why torture some Libyan into pretending that Saddam Hussein taught Al-Qaeda how to make chemical weapons? Just make up a lie. You got to torture some innocent guy, or not innocent guy. He was an Al-Qaeda guy, but you got to torture him into accusing Saddam? Just pretend he accused Saddam. Why you got to torture the guy? You know, it doesn't make sense to me. Just go ahead and tell the lie. Now, you're lying when you pretend to believe it, right? So what's the difference?
Yeah. You see the same thing in the reporting on Iran, too. I mean, it's taken for granted that every time one of their leaders gets up there behind a microphone, they're saying death to America, death to Israel. And then when you actually go to look at the transcriptions of some of these speeches that are touted all over, you know, mainstream media here saying white devils, you know, Holocaust, Jews, all this stuff. And then you can't really drill down on the actual translations of some of these speeches, and then you find out it was like Memory or some other outfit that told, you know, whatever politician here or media person there that was indeed the transcription, and it just makes you second guess everything that you see.
Right. Yeah, and famously the Mahmoud Ahmadinejad saying that they're going to wipe Israel off the map.
Right.
Which was just completely wrong, and for people who are interested in that, you can read I hate to say it, but Juan Cole wrote a great thing because he can understand the language and translate it for you. And some others wrote it up too. And the quote was that the Zionist regime, the government in Israel, will one day vanish from the page of time, which was a paraphrase of the old dead Ayatollah Khomeini saying that one day the regime in Moscow will vanish from the page of time. Now, I don't think anybody thought that the Ayatollah Khomeini was threatening aggressive war against the Soviet Union in 1984 or whatever it was. He was saying that one day it will cease to exist, and then it did. Right. And he, by the way, was paraphrasing an ancient poem. So this is like a famous kind of Persian idiom, that something horrible. In other words, it's almost like saying, be patient. One day you'll go away. Just like they did with Khrushchev saying, we will bury you. All that meant was, I'll be at your funeral. You'll die before me. We'll outlast you. That's what it means. We will bury you. We will outlast you. Not, we're going to kill you by burying you alive in nuclear radiation or whatever they pretended to believe he meant by that, you know?
Right. I mean, there's no doubt that both sides are enemies. But as, you know, a consumer of news, I want to make sure what I'm reading is truthful. That's all I ask. And when you have intermediaries translating speeches, and then whatever those translations are taken for, you know, truth, and passed on over and over and over again without question, that bothers me, because then I question everything that I read after that. Yep. But we see that, you see that in the bounty story, you see that in many other stories of the whole Russian meddling story. And, you know, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Donald Trump, but when you start digging into these things and you realize how fast and loose that they're playing with the facts on the ground, and you realize, wow, I can't believe anything these Democrats are saying about Russian meddling.
Well, and that's good. I mean, nobody should ever believe them. Everything that they say, I mean, particularly if what they're saying is accusing somebody else of something, The burden of proof is on them, and beyond a reasonable doubt isn't good enough. I want beyond a shadow of a doubt that what they say is true, or else I'm not having it. And that's no matter who they're picking on. Whether they're accusing, a foreign dictator, the very worst one. I don't care. I mean, North Korea is probably the most totalitarian state in the world. But if they're accusing Kim Jong-un of something, the first question is, why are they accusing? Not whether it's true or not. Take for granted that it's true. But what's their point? If they're just saying that he's a bad guy, they want to demonize him for something or whatever. They always try to conflate the ruthlessness of a dictator with their willingness to invade foreign countries, which are entirely separate questions. They want to conflate things like that all the time. That ruthless means insane and impossible to estimate in reasonable calculation what they might do, which is nonsense. I mean, tell that to Fatah al-Sisi. Tell me he's not a psychopath, but he's a loyal, reliable sock puppet. They're not worried about what he's going to do because he belongs to them.
Ditto for Saudi Arabia and MBS.
Yep. I was just thinking, too, the whole argument about Iraq War I was like, Saddam, if we don't do anything, he could take over Saudi Arabia, too. And then what? Turn it into a secular fascist dictatorship instead of a royal theocracy? I don't know.
Right.
I bet the people of Saudi Arabia probably would have preferred to live under Saddam Hussein. Not that he was really going to invade Saudi Arabia. That was a lie, of course. But I'm just saying, if that had happened, I don't know. Why do I care again? I don't know.
Yeah. Why do I care again?
I don't see it. All right. Well, anyway, I'm sorry. I have yelled at you during your interview for a good hour here, and I appreciate your patience with me. And
this is wonderful. I always have a great time here.
Great. Well, it's great to talk to you again, and you talk about wanting to know the truth and that you can rely on it. Well, that's what the American Conservative magazine is for, and we do rely on you guys a great deal for all of the great work that you do. That's why we link to you virtually every single day, of course, at antiwar.com as well. That is theamericanconservative.com for the great Kelley B. Vlahos. Thank you again.
Thank you.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.